Hello, everybody. This is Monica Paolini from Senza Fili, and today we're doing Sparring Partners on energy efficiency. And welcome you all. First of all, if you, the usual housekeeping notes, and then we will go with the discussion. As most of you know probably already, this is a conversation. It's a conversation where you can participate through the chat and the Q&A, and we encourage that. So feel free to send in your questions and your comments as well. You can talk to each other. You all see what you say. Because of that, please be nice, considerate of other people's opinions. Feel free to ask any questions you have. However, do not hold them until the end, because we do not have a formal Q&A session at the end. We just take the questions as they come, if we can, and they fit in the discussion. So we might not take them right away, but eventually we'll get to them, hopefully. Sorry. Okay, so this is the first thing. This is somewhat of an unusual Sparring Partners in that is part of a series. Usually every Sparring Partners has a completely different topic, but this is the fourth in the energy efficiency series. And this is because I got very much interested in the topic and I'm writing a report on it. So this is, I'm finding out so many interesting new aspects to look into. And so we had 4 of them. And this conversation is going to be part of the report, which is going to come out in a few weeks. Previous ones I had one with Vodafone, one with Deutsche Telekom, and another one with Mike Short, who has worked everywhere pretty much and has been working a lot on energy efficiency. Today, we are going to talk about infrastructure sharing. And so the report title is going to be Energy Efficiency in Wireless RAN and Beyond. And today we're definitely in the beyond territory. Oftentimes when we think about energy efficiency, we think about the RAN, because clearly most of the energy consumption is in the RAN. So that's the sort of low-hanging fruit. And that's true. There is no question about it. However, there is much more many more ways in which we can be more energy efficient. And so today we're going to explore in one direction. So we actually talked a little bit about this in the Sparring Partners with Mike Short, but also we also talked about increasing the energy efficiency in our vertical with Mike. Today we're going to talk about sharing infrastructure. So if you share, shouldn't you be more energy efficient? And so we're going to talk about that, because again, like with everything that has to do with energy efficiency, there is no yes or no, or 10%, 50%, or 100% answer. Everything is a little bit more complex. So with that, I would like to introduce my guest. Okay, hold on here. Let me, okay, Mark. Okay, hold on here. Sorry, I'm usually not doing the moderating part. The moderating part. So I'm having an extra job today. So Mark, welcome so much, and thanks for being with us today. I have to say I've known Mark for a very long time, and he has been working in all sorts of places. So today he's going to talk with his new hat as the CTO of ConnectivitiTree. And he will tell us what he's working on right now. But we're going to talk about all sorts of other things as well, which relate to his, long experience in different sorts of wireless enterprises and his interest in energy consumption. So, Mark, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. Great to be speaking to you.
And okay, so for those of you that don't know you, could you tell us who you are and what you do at ConnectivitiTree?
Sure thing. Yeah, I'm Mark Gilmour. I'm now CTO at ConnectivitiTree, which is a new network provider and company that was formed to provide high-speed data transport in the wholesale backbone environment. I have responsibility for the technical strategy, development, IT, all of those sorts of things, but also as part of my remit, I'm also the executive champion for ESG within ConnectivitiTree. But my background, as Monica says, is kind of varied from both the operator and the vendor standpoint. I was at a well-known enterprise connectivity player a couple of years ago, and the PR department there once put out a post about me and said industry veteran. Now I wasn't quite sure whether I was happy about that term or not, but I suppose when you've been around the block a roll around or two, and I suppose you do get that. I did have a good giggle with the team that together. But yeah, I've been around, involved now in the development of 3G, 4G, 5G networks, and kind of took the leap to join ConnectivitiTree because it was about building greenfield, building a brand new network, leveraging the technology and processes and procedures and automation and things like that is available in today's technology. You don't often get that opportunity to jump into that. So it comes around maybe once or twice in a career in the spans. And I was fortunate enough to be involved in the introduction and development of Hutch 3G. Back in the UK, at the turn of the century, to come around again and get the opportunity to now build a high-speed data transport network that is pan-European and global, that was just too good an opportunity to miss. But as a result, this has become such a key topic on my agenda. Energy efficiency, it's really vital. One from a kind of a bottom line point of view in terms of costs, as for us as a company and things like that. But more importantly, I'm also a dad. I've in my time in my career, my family has grown and things, and I also look towards the future direction of where our industry is going, where our economy is going, where our general population is going. And we've now got past the discussion about whether we need to do something about it. That discussion's long gone. Thankfully, we're now at the position where actually we are doing something about it, and what are those changes and how do we move those forward. So I think that's really, really important. It's an important part of my work life now, and my work remit at ConnectivitiTree. So yeah, I suppose a little bit about it.
No, that's very interesting, and I think you raised a very important point. It's like we're sort of past the talking about it. We're doing something. Unfortunately, I have to say that a lot of people are still talking about it and are still at the PowerPoint stage of making a point. But what I'm finding out as I'm digging deeper here is that oftentimes what you see is a sort of a personal commitment of us veterans, as you say. This is the distinct. But I guess that the issue of sort of being a veteran is that we have the opportunity to actually do and say things that we probably could not have had when we were just straight out of college. And so we have seen a lot. We have a lot of experience, and this is when I talked to you about it the first time. You realize that it's not just stating the obvious or doing the obvious, is to really try to go beyond and to think about energy efficiency in a new way. And this is also good. This is clearly good for the environment, good for society and everything. But as you say, it's also going to be good for the cost, for the bottom line. And I think that if we do it, that if we look at it that way, then being energy efficient is not going to come at a cost. It's going to come at just changing the way we operate and be even more profitable. So a lot going on there. And I guess that ConnectivitiTree is an example of the innovation that clearly you're not doing ConnectivitiTree just to save energy, but it's an important part. It's an important part, and so energy efficiency is going to also drive the creation of new business models, new ways to do business. And so, So go ahead.
Or revitalize old ones that perhaps for different reasons fell out of favor, but actually become more imperative or more viable, or perhaps we get rid of some of the stigmas that are attached to them for the sake of energy efficiency or environmental sort of approaches to it. I'm not saying that's the one and only reason, but it can bring out some old techniques that we've had in the past that make sense again, or make more sense again. In my early career, I was involved in the major network sharing opportunities in the UK that were pioneering at the time. Things such as MBNL and Cornerstone in the UK, between the major mobile operators. And that was an opportunity, or that was a business model based upon the collective use of resources for business benefits. So the idea of infrastructure sharing, network sharing, and things like that, it's not new. In fact, it's in some ways it's kind of an old done and dusted market is kind of the view. But actually, looking at it from this perspective brings a new light into that. That's one of the things that I've noticed.
Absolutely, and I think that applies to a bunch of other things. So, like for instance, sleep patterns have been around forever, but operators would not have the sort of like, there would be not enough momentum to use them, because like, well, and same thing with the infrastructure sharing. Everybody would see the advantages of it, but like, well, do we really need to do it? And now, so maybe we should.
Well, yeah, and other arguments come into play, such as network sovereignty and things such as network. I differentiate by my network. That was a common one that was used. That's my crown jewels as such, and so that's how I differentiate my service. I think as an industry, we've grown up a little bit more in terms of actually the customer the end customer wants more than just network. That's a given when we speak about that. So I see how this concept now is somewhat revitalized. And it's slightly different in what I'm doing today. Because I'm no longer working in the RAN and the mobile access space as such. Where we position ourselves now is actually in that old space that was once called wholesale, the big wholesale market, but it's cross-border, cross-international border, high-speed data transport, based on fiber optic networks. It's that backbone element that used to be, and in the historically everybody builds their own in that space. Now we're coming at it as a slightly different player in that, in not focusing on that last mile or that enterprise space in terms of serving the enterprise, but actually serving the carrier market, the telecom space, and doing that part really well so that it allows carriers to focus on serving their enterprise customers and expanding their capabilities into the enterprise customers, because the end game for, or the reach to those enterprise space is often based upon geography. How far, can you hit my office locations? Can you hit my space? And that drives operators to try and reach as much as possible. And then you get into the game of do I build or buy to get there? And so then there's the lease market and things like that. But we're in ConnectivitiTree, I'm coming at it from a point of view of, I build that dedicated space to get from one location to another, so that then that enterprise access piece could be delivered locally. And so that's why this is an interesting topic for me, because it is my business model. And then I see how then the sharing aspect, the impact that has then for energy consumption. And so, I mean, I wanted to chat with you really about how we kind of bust some of those myths in there as well, and some of and where we are right now, and it's not perfect in that.
Yeah. So before we go, so we're going to talk more about how we measure and all the kind of details. But maybe you can just quickly tell us how in a ConnectivitiTree you offer, when you talk to your customers, what is your proposition in terms of energy efficiency? How is that you make it more efficient?
Right. Okay, that's
like the 30-second spiel to the client.
The 30-second spiel is actually going to become the meat of this conversation, actually, really, in that the premise of being able to offer efficiency gains in energy consumption for our customers, and therefore for their end customer, is based in the fact of really trying to maximize a metric that isn't very good today. So what we do by utilizing latest generation of technology, by optimizing the processes to utilize that network in terms of the ability to consume off that, managing the whole life cycle of that, it's inherently more efficient in how that service is delivered, because it's not purely about the amount of power that a box or a piece of tin consumes. It's everything that goes around that, and we see that in the whole discussion around Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions for the company. And I know that the direction towards managing those emissions is somewhat focused on Scope 1 and Scope 2 for a company, because those are the things they can control, and they can do things about those. When it comes to Scope 3 is still a little bit of a black hole in terms of how to manage that, and it somewhat gets punted to the side to say, okay, we know we've got this big elephant in the room to work on, but let's focus on Scope 1 and Scope 2, and I think that is a wise course of direction, because if we just punted the whole thing to the future and said, well, we don't know how to deal with this piece yet, so therefore I'm not going to do anything, that's not the right approach either. So we focus on those things that we can deal with. But in the Scope 3 dealing with Scope 3, if every part of the industry needs to do their little bit to help each other reduce their Scope 3. So I suppose my short answer to this, which I've not done a very good job of making it short. So if you ask me the question again, I'll say, well, we can help an operator customer and also their customer reduce down their Scope 3 emissions in this part of the network. So we're doing our bit to help them reduce scope 3 in that. And it is about energy efficiency in terms of how we produce the and on transport services. It's also about how we do things as well that leads into that.
Yes, and I think you bring that's sort of the beyond part in a way. So it's not only beyond the RAN, it's beyond the network, really.
Yeah.
I mean, if you define the network as the part of the thing that a network operator does, right? Because it's more than that. And you know, from a vendor point of view, it's the same thing, because you know, you're going to buy components. Where are those made? So it's kind of like it's a wider effect. I would say that even for scope 1 and scope 2, there is a huge amount of complexity, I should say, in just measuring efficiency. Actually, even measuring consumption is not trivial. Measuring efficient is much more difficult. And then when you go to scope 3, it becomes really, really hard. It's really hard to get everything together in one way to look at it. And yet, that I think is the challenge and the opportunity at the same time, to kind of say, okay, how do we put everything together? We cannot do everything at the same time, and actually, I would say maybe we need to. There's going to be some priorities, but we need to think broadly as power efficiency as being part of the strategy, in the same way that performance is. So if you're operating a network, you want it to have the performance and to meet the requirements you need. Everybody understands it. And I think that now power efficiency, energy efficiency is going to be another dimension there that is just going to stay there. And that's a good thing, but we need to get used to how does that work with the rest of it? And how do we even see, you know, so, you know, like for instance, all of us going to Mobile World Congress, that was not really, you know, energy efficient, but yeah, you have to do it. So, you know, at some point, you're not going to say, well, we're not going to do anything because it's not energy efficient, but we need to sort of think about all sorts of ramifications that this has. So let's talk about energy efficiency. So let's start from the top. A lot of so Etsy is working, and GMN they're working on trying to figure out ways to measure it. But it's complex. So no matter what kind of metric, what kind of KPI you come up with, there is still the issue of how you do measure it in the live network, not in the lab, in the live network. But anyway, so I know, Mark, you've given a lot of thought to that. So yeah, do we know how to even measure and think about it?
Well, let me start with the thinking about it part, and then we'll come to the measuring part. So the way we kind of deal with it as an industry at the moment is we talk about energy efficiency in terms of it's a relative measure. In terms of comparing back to what we've done in the past, or kind of generation of equipment and things like that. I think I have the ability to share screen, don't I? So if I've let me share a quick picture that I pulled together from from looking at our own comparative study here. Hopefully that's come up okay. And people can see that. Mm-hmm. So this is a chart of power, space, and capacity, and shows a 10-year period in terms of the capabilities in network equipment. Now, as a new vendor, as a new operator in the space, and a greenfield operator, I get the benefit of being able to leverage latest generation of technology. So we went back and did a bit of a study in terms of what would it have been like if we had built what we're building today on previous generation of equipment or previous generation technology, and looked at that from a power, space, and capacity point of view, and you get this kind of curve, but it's inherently it looks great on a slide like this. You know, we've got a reduction in power of 83% based upon 10 years ago. we're utilizing 87% less space, and that then returns into cooling and power consumed in that, because that's a huge factor in terms of the piece, and in terms of the overall power consumption. And then, delivering a 95% increase in capacity. So, those are great figures when you look at it like that. However, there is a kind of a caveat to that. And the caveat to that is that it's based on utilization. If I looked at it from a pure absolute point of view, in terms of what is the power that is being consumed, then the power to deliver those circuits is actually increased. The actual amount of power it takes to deliver, to keep the lights on and things like that has actually increased. But we're delivering so much more capability in that. So this idea of, so often it's expressed or measured in a sense of the amount of watts or power per gigabit or bit or something like that. It's addressed as a relative measure. Now, the problem with that is that it assumes that you're fully maxing out utilization. So you only get to those numbers when you maximize the delivery across that network that you're building. And the reality is that as an industry, we don't fill the networks. There's portions of it that get congested, but we don't fill it. And so to really accurately benefit from that figure of that reduction in power consumed per gigabit, you really have to be able to maximize the utilization. So obviously that lends itself to an idea of how do you fill the network. If one operator on their own can't fill that, because then they start and you've got people building multiple routes. In our case, cross nations, cross borders, that backbone sort of space, and that just doesn't make sense from an investment point of view, and then in this case from a power consumption point of view. So what we're able to then suggest, what I'm suggesting is that with the ability to build a greenfield network like we've done, and I'm mindful that those listening in on this session right now, they're not in that same position, which is why I jumped at the chance to go and do this. But what it means is that as a provider, if you do infrastructure sharing in this way, then it allows others to benefit. The whole point is that we reduce down our scope 1 and our scope 2, which allows then that translates into a scope 3 reduction for anybody that uses that network. And so this is where it really starts to come together for across that sort of environment, that high capacity sort of network, so that we can really start to fill the space. There was an interesting question that just came through. Can I take that question?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And actually, let me say something. I think that the neutral host model, it just goes across the whole network. The idea that you have someone who is doing, somebody that can basically share the infrastructure. The neutral host is basically infrastructure sharing in some respect. And what that allows you to do, as you say, is that instead of having 2 pipes half filled, it's better to have 1 pipe fully filled. And then you can. But if you look at it, what that also encourages is more competition and more players, because you cannot be a player, build your own infrastructure, because it would be very inefficient. But in this case, the more players, it doesn't really matter, because you can sort of maximize the utilization. Anyway, okay, so neutral host model. And actually, another thing that what people define as neutral host the definition of a neutral host is somewhat, well, I use somewhat of a different one, because it's not necessarily, sometimes the strict one is like you have a DAS, and then you have a neutral host that connects different mobile operators. And I think that's number one. But I think of a neutral host for a much bigger, sort of a much wider concept. That it's not just a DAS thing. But Mark, what do you?
Yeah, if you broaden out that definition, then yeah, you've got different models from a DAS in a stadium, for example,
Yeah.
or JOTS in the UK, as a standard for in-building coverage, to, you know, using your definition there, Monica, then, you know, does NBN in Australia qualify as a neutral host, you know, where it's an infrastructure provider built for others to operate? In theory, then, using that model, yes. The question was, am I advocating for neutral host? I think in certain environments, I think it makes absolute sense. Like in building is a classic case of where neutral host makes a heap of sense. And I know I've got friends and colleagues in different parts of the industry that will be equally jumping up for joy when I say that, and others that will be cursing and swearing at their laptop for me saying that. But I am an advocate of neutral host. I think it makes a whole heap of sense. And I think this is, and again, it's not a new concept. This is one of those examples where you kind of go back to say, actually, neutral, you know, bringing up that topic again, through the eyes of energy efficiency and consumption, does it push the business case that little bit further? I think on its own, no, but as part of the wider remit, the wider TCO, the wider experience, does it help make that business case? I think it can do. So yeah, I'm an advocate. In previous roles, I've investigated the possibility for that. I think I've sometimes had a habit in my career of being just a little bit too early in the space, and we see it, but we're seeing a lot of development now in the industry right now for developing a neutral host sort of model, whether that's in the RAN access space or in a what's otherwise known as a broad wholesale backbone market. It's a similar sort of principle. I build an infrastructure so that you don't have to, and you can minimize, you can maximize benefit over that, and I can maximize the efficiencies in that network, not just from an energy point of view, but efficiencies from operations and from delivery, from, you know, cost of ownership, et cetera, that into that becomes part of the more rounded discussion. And I think that was a point you made at the beginning, Monica, that it's not just treating this as it's on its own piece. It's actually now become part of the whole TCO, the whole business case discussion. Energy efficiency becomes part of that piece rather than just some outliner that is sat over there somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the neutral host got us with a bunch of other questions. And actually, I'm going to have another Sparring Partners. I thought it would be four of them on energy efficiency. There's going to be another one with Simon Fletcher, the Small Cell Forum, which is another way to look at the sharing of the infrastructure, whether you want to call it neutral host or not. I think that's a terminology issue. But, you know, again, we need to look at it because it's not so much. This is the interesting part about energy efficiency, is the utilization factor. because we never, as you say, we never run a capacity. And in fact, this is a design thing. So whenever I do a model, I always assume that whatever you're doing, you're not going to be going beyond 80% capacity of what the specs say, because that's the kind of thing. And then this is like, you know, general in the industry, you don't want to run everything at max because there's always, you know, just sort of for comfort. But then there is a lot of clearly, you cannot just fill the pipes because there is a difference in terms of time and all that. So the more diversity, the better off you are, sort of intuitively.
Yeah, I think you raise an interesting point about how we plan networks. Traditionally, we have an approach to how we plan networks. Like you say, we forecast up to whatever that value is, a threshold, and then we're going to put in the next piece of capacity so that we never hit blockages and things like that in the network. But then the introduction of different ways of managing and utilization, managing traffic routing and things such as like that allow us to get greater utilization out of the whole footprint. And those techniques have made their way into the long haul space as well, which is, you know, the space that I'm predominantly talking about in this context. And so it's not just a case of, you know, the power consumption of the box. It's also about how you then manage that network, optimize that network, and run it from an automation point of view, from an operational point of view. You know, the vectors of power consumption are, you know, power that your network itself consumes, or not necessarily power consumption, but maybe greenhouse gas emissions is the power that we use on the equipment, but the power we also use to service that, and the people that we use to service that. You know, can you optimize how that? And I'm not talking about just reducing down headcount. I'm talking about how we more smartly approach the network and manage that. So all of those operational tools make a huge difference into that as well. Not just you know, when you turn the box, you know, a box or whatever on, how much power is it consuming that?
Yeah,
so
no, absolutely. And that's a kind of harder, because let's say that you reduce the operational cost and the maintenance costs. It's a cost, or it's not just the cost, it's also the power required to do that. So how do you measure it? However, it's not trivial, because what do you compare it to? Yeah, you compare it to the previous generation, but then is it, you know, are you comparing the same thing by comparing to the previous generation? And that kind of brings the question that Upendra Pringle is asking about power, space, and capacity. And he asked, while we look at this model, shouldn't driving power consumption down be one of the first drivers towards this goal? And I would say yes, if you're comparing the same thing. So if you have a network and it's just keeps doing the same thing, we want to take power consumption down for the same thing. But most of the time, what you're doing is that you are building a network that was not there before, or you're serving customers you were not serving before, or you're trying to do more. So yes, we should be looking at reducing power consumption, you know, operating expenses and all of that. But in absolute terms, that might not mean less consumption overall, because we're doing more. So if we increase you know, the number of enterprise customers, because enterprises have more of a network. If we, you know, have a higher capacity, more traffic, well, then we shouldn't really be, you know, just trying to, I think it's unrealistic to try to reduce power consumption in total, because we're doing so much more.
But I think that's a really interesting point, Monica, because I think we, as an industry, we do have to look at ways of turning down the absolute power as well.
No, right.
And not just doing more for the same amount of power, or more for a little bit more. You know, that those figures that I showed, the absolute power, and this helps to answer the other question that's on there from Chiara, is, you know, the absolute power has gone up. It actually, to be able to deliver that 83% more, what was the number? The 95% increase in capacity, the absolute power to deliver that has actually gone up. It's still as a percentage much less than doing that. If I wanted to deliver that same amount of capacity 10 years ago, I would have needed 90. I've had an 83% reduction. So, you know, doing the maths, you know, I would have needed that much more power to do it. You know, it's phenomenal on that. But yes, my energy bill, if you want to call it, is more than it was previously. And so I think it is correct to say, yes, we do need to do more to reduce down the absolute power consumption. And that, because that's why the watts per gigabit, or the power consumption per gigabit measure is a good measure when, you know, it's one that we've got, but it is limited in its effectiveness if you're not utilizing that space. You've got to, you know, if I just took that same equipment from 10 years ago, or the same sort of network design 10 years ago, brought that forward to today, and put just 1 gig of traffic on it, then my watts per gig figure is not going to improve. It's in fact going to be worse, because overall I need more power to just run, but I can get much more capacity, and that's obviously the case of what we deal with. And that's part of the advocacy for neutral host shared infrastructure sort of models, is that it helps to drive that utilization. But I was in conversation with the CTO of one of the major technology partners that we work with, and, you know, it was talking about this ability. Can we actually reduce down the amount of absolute power that's being used? So on that journey to improve the utilization, you know, are there things that can be done? And there are some things that are happening. You know, if you look for example, in the you know, virtualized network space and open source hardware and things like that, and cloud infrastructure where you can spin up CPUs, GPUs as you need, and then turn them down. There are those sorts of technologies, but that's still somewhat demand driven, and it's still a bit coarse as a technology. There's a long way to go to improve at the silicon level how power is consumed. So there's still a journey to go on that, in terms of that approach.
But at the same time, I mean, so there is a lot that we can do just to reduce power within even existing networks, like, you know, having sleep, as you say, you know, turn off hardware that you don't use, and, you know, so there is a huge amount of scope for reducing the absolute power consumption. And this is because there is a lot of things, a lot of tools that have been available for a long time, but have not been really used because it was not really a priority. So I think that as an industry, there is a huge potential for reducing consumption, even on what we have, or to select, you know, solutions that are, you know, smaller, shared, or, you know, whatever. But if you look at it, for instance, for you know, like a building kind of perspective, an enterprise, if they build, you know, they have their Wi-Fi network and they want to build their private network, clearly that private network adds to the building or to their own power consumption. there is no way around it because it didn't have anything before. So we need to kind of be to acknowledge that part, but at the same time, clearly we need to, and I think that the two are sort of in parallel. We need to reduce the absolute consumption because that's the only, I mean, that's a way to be more efficient, but we need to look at the bigger perspective of what is that we're trying. So we do not want to do it at the expense of not building the infrastructure because it uses.
Well, you got exactly. The answer is not to stop. Is not to say, okay, we've reached a plateau of whatever we do now is just going to make matters worse. And that absolutely not. We need to innovate to be able to continue, because it will carry on otherwise. And so we can't just carry on doing things the way we've done them. It does, you know, how we've done things in the past doesn't necessarily mean that that's the recipe for the future. When you're talking about in building piece as well, you know, adding. Here's the interesting thing about the question, or the situation you just raised there. An enterprise or a building owner goes and puts in a space for you know, a private network for cellular. So now that network, those customers inside that building are being served by the private network. They're no longer being served, or the neutral host network, they're no longer being served by the outdoor macros that are. So those outdoor macros become more efficient as a result to serve the outdoor customers of that network. So the implication is that by, you know, as this grows, as more indoor neutral host networks, for example, are built, and I'll advocate for that, are built, that actually has a net benefit to the outdoor environment, which is no longer having to be engineered to cope with the outdoor environment, plus trying to get through the natural attenuator, which is building, or the building fabric or the glass, to be able to serve customers indoors. You know, so this comes back to the, I think, the point you make, that it has to be considered in the whole round. So where energy consumption may rise on this side of the fence, it can have a knock-on effect of increasing the efficiency over here and reduce down that significantly. So net, the actual overall consumption is less.
But then we go into the scope 3 territory, because from a mobile operator point of view, you have all your macros, and the efficiency of the macros might not change all that much by the indoor infrastructure, because it's the enterprise or the building owners that manage it. So,
yeah, but there's a study that says that 80% of mobile usage, is indoors.
No. I'm completely with you. I'm just saying of the sort of the accounting part of it. Okay. Yeah. So from a physics point of view, it's clearly much better to have indoor infrastructure because it's going to be more efficient in terms of power consumption. However, from an operator point of view, or for the building owner point of view, it might be more difficult to account for the benefit, because the benefit is to the overall society. It's beyond the building owner and the operator owner. And so I think that we need to sort of start thinking about it, not just in terms of the entity that is running the network, but at the society, I mean, the overall society level, which is, you know, that's where we get into the scope 3 again, part of it. Because the operator benefits from the indoor infrastructure, even though that's not going to be part of their own direct reduction. I mean, they see a reduction, but it's hard for them to document and to account for it. And so I don't have any answer to that, but I think this is really important to keep in mind, that it's not just the power efficiency you see on your macro station, is the overall. Because what we're trying to do is to be more efficient as a society, not.
Yes, and so this is, so you lead on to I'm going to use this as a springboard then to talk about an initiative that we're trying to get off the ground internally. Then that is, we recognize that, you know, we can benefit from those numbers that I put on the screen. because we're building a greenfield network. We have those operational procedures and automation in place. So it allows us then to get to those figures, particularly as we then fill that network up. So what that means is that we can work out an accounting methodology, not necessarily in terms of power bits, but in terms of a power watts consumed type of thing, but certainly in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, for example, carbon accounting or something in that sort of measure, and translate that then into a credit or a value that our customer can use to say, here is a value attached to from an energy efficiency point of view, from a carbon efficiency point of view. Here is a value attached to running my service over the ConnectivitiTree network, over the C-Tree root net that we call it. So if I could choose to do this in another way, but if I choose to put it over the ConnectivitiTree network, over the C-Tree root net, then here is a value, and it's a value that then contributes into the whole part of Scope 3 emissions. It's not the answer to everything, but it's a part. Now the challenge, and you hinted to it earlier, is about the robust accounting of that, certifiable accounting, so that it is verifiable, it is trustworthy, and whilst it does a lot of good to plant more trees and things like that, it's not carrier grade accounting. It's not financial grade accounting. So it's to take something like that. We strongly believe in building that. So in the background, we are working on a solution to that. We're not there yet with it, but it's something that we are working with specialists in the field, not in the telco field, specialists in the accounting field, to come up with methodologies that are traceable, that are viable, verifiable, and can be used to generate a carbon credit or a value against it that helps to prove that operator, that customer, is reducing their Scope 3 emissions.
No, absolutely, and I think that's going to be an increasingly large issue, because there is a sense of sort of greenwashing, or the fact that the way things are now, you can sort of say you reach some level of efficiency, but it's hard to really make sure that that's the case. Now, I guess that's something that we need to keep working as we do things. It's kind of, and as you say, it's not a wireless or a telecom issue. It's just a wider issue of how do you measure things, and how strict you want it to be. What's the best way to do it? We're not, again, planting trees is not the solution. I mean, well, there's nothing wrong with it, but we need to do something that is more specific to what we're doing. To be more efficient. And so the question is like, what and I think that there is no answer here, and as you say, we need to work towards it. It's like, how do you measure it, and how do you account for it? So there is a measurement part and the accounting part, and I guess we're still, there's still a lot of work to do, and we need to resist the temptation to just have the PowerPoint, like, this is what we've done, and God knows what actually was conducive. Because when you look at what's the power consumption, or what is the efficiency, there's all sorts of ways to fudge that data, because as you say, it's so complicated that it's very easy to just have pretty much any number.
Well, that's why it has to be verifiable. it has to be auditable. And so this is where the industry, our industry needs to turn to, experts in the field, not in the telco field, but in the energy consumption, energy efficiency field. There are standards that are being derived for that, science-based target initiatives, et cetera, that help to make us as an industry more accountable into that. And I'm a firm believer in that. So that's why we're engaged with partners in this field that are outside of the telco space to leverage their knowledge to be able to come up with those mechanisms for doing such. And then allow that then gives back to our customers. So like, right, you asked me the question, can you just give me the 60-second, how does that apply to your customers? How do you do it? What we have done is we've done that bit and then spent the rest of this time talking about how we then get back to that, which is how do they then recognize the benefit of what I'm doing as a network provider. They then recognize the benefit of that in their targets, in their direction, in their overall reduction in power consumption, or in energy, or increase in power efficiency, energy efficiency.
Yeah, because the counting bit is also valuable for the operators to internally assess what they're doing. So it's not, so there is the sort of the part where they need to talk and justify. There might be regulatory requirements or targets that they're trying to meet sort of in the public, but also to know internally, how is everything contributing to the overall goal. So they need to also track it within themselves. Now, one thing is that when we talk about this, there's clearly a lot of work going on. So we still haven't figured out everything, or in fact, we haven't figured out most of the stuff, but it's clear the direction we're going. And I think that this is going to change the way we think about networks in the sense that, as I said before, it used to be that you only care about performance, coverage, capacity, whatever the case may be. And power efficiency was just something you just over provision the network. So we're moving in a situation where you do not over provision, and having, virtualization, the ability to share networks, because, it's not just a physical issue, like in your case, it's like the ability to actually share infrastructure and guaranteeing everybody the SLA. So it's more than just sharing.
It's absolutely, it's operational. It's and it's process driven as well, to think about how do we more efficiently and effectively manage our whole operation. It's not just one piece. It's also about how do we deliver across things such as I made a note here of some of the things that we've put together that are part of that ethos that then respond back to the customer, and thinking about it differently, because we're already at that position. When in this position where I've taken on this responsibility to design, build a brand new network, it does give you the opportunity to think about things differently. And I recognize that not everybody is in that space. So you lead out in where you can, and then use some of those techniques to help benefit in other spaces. But it's about it becomes a choice into your supply chain. I think it becomes a key factor in how do you procure services or technology. It becomes part of that discussion piece in terms of what are the energy efficiency credentials of the supply chain that you're sourcing. And then how do we generate power? I'm not in the power generation game, but I consume power for my network in the data centers and things. So we've made active choices about where we go with the network based upon how they provide power. And as I look at our infrastructure, you know, we push this so that all of our data center providers, that they're working towards, or if not already there, 90%, 95% power consumption from renewable sources. You know, those are the sort of directions that you have to start driving things in. We've spoken about the utilization piece, about pushing up how the network is used. The design and the automation and the operation part of that becomes part of it. But then also this company ethos in terms of how do you as a company operate? How do you as a people operate? What are your practices involved in that? Because that's the other big consumer of energy, whether that be, you know, generated energy or indirectly through travel and things like that. How do you operate in that space? So those become part of the component parts that make up how you approach it. We could
we can go on for it.
We could carry on, and you and I have done.
It's not, and I would say that it's not just the company, it's also the subscribers that ask for it. So I think that there's a whole set of constraints or pushing towards more efficiency. Mark, we need to let everybody else go and we need to get going too. But thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity. Great to speak to you, Monica. Take care.
And thank you all for, hold on here, for being with us today and sharing sharing your questions. And hold on here, this is like, okay, hold on. There. As usual, the video is going to be available soon. And also we will have the transcript that is going to be part of the upcoming reports, and you will know about that. And there should be another another Sparring Partners of Energy Efficiency with the Simon Fletcher, the Small Cell Forum, where we're going to talk about more indoor versus outdoor small cells, macro cells, and how all of that fits together. And that's going to be another interesting conversation, I believe, in terms of trying to entangle all the different aspects of energy efficiency. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.